Hello, my name is Harrison Zott, and I live at 131 Huron Drive. I have just recently written a letter to the mayor and committee, and I would now like to share it with you. It would be a continuation of what Mr. Boyd stated. Dear committee members, I am 10 years old and I have been living in Chatham for all my life. Chatham is full of wildlife and it has helped me to learn more about nature. I just learned about ecosystems in school. I learned that if one animal or plant dies, all the others that depend on that animal or plant will no longer be able to live. It has been brought to my attention that you are planning to put units on River Road, which is almost behind my house. There is a lot of wildlife there, including bears, foxes, deer, hawks, ravens, owls, and woodpeckers. If you build the units, you will destroy the ecosystems in the forest. This will make all the animals move away from their homes. How would you feel if you had to move away from your home? This is why I am concerned about you putting units in the middle of the sensitive area. I hope you take into consideration what I said in this letter.
Please add flexibility to the amended settlement agreement so that we can continue to study alternate sites and we can find a solution that actually makes sense. Thank you.
Welcome. We're here at the Passaic River County Park right at the edge of River Road in Chatham Township, next to Long Hill Township. And I'm here to talk to you or introduce and get you excited to start thinking about where the Passaic River Ecological Greenway is in reference to an impact that we're here to discuss off of River Road on the steep slopes, a 10-acre site of slated development where we're concerned about it as a buffer habitat to this incredible 14-mile stretch of riverine habitat that starts in Stanley Park, goes all the way to the Dead River in Bedminster. So let's take the journey together and hopefully you'll learn a couple of key facts to keep in mind when you're discussing this impact on the River Road Ridge. Water flows downhill, so the great introduction to this subject of how what we do on one side of the ridge is going to affect the other is what you're looking at right here. As the pathway of water throughout the ground is filtering on the upland side, it ends up being really filtered in a wetland sedge meadow like this within a couple hundred meters of the Passaic River. So this is a great way to introduce the subject of how important buffer habitat is to the ecological sustainability of the Passaic River Ecoplex. So here we are right at the edge of the Passaic River in the middle of what I call the ecological complex greenway that runs that 14 miles. Listen, everything that happens upstream is going to affect what's happening downstream. The diversity within this forest we're going to talk about at other stops, but it's highest here in these floodplains and wetlands. And again, we're talking about a ridge that has geologic significance. It's the second Watchung terminal moraine area, which held back a giant lake 12,000 years ago. And it's aesthetically a beautiful ridge. If you're in New Providence looking up, you see the ridge. If you're on the top of the ridge on Huron Drive looking into New York City, it's scenically beautiful. All these types of elements are spoken to in your master plan and in your conservation element papers that you can use to look at this application in a more balanced perspective. Amazing. We just came to this aberrant spot to do a little clip by the Passaic River to make sure you saw what the Passaic River looked like. And I hear the quirr, quirr, quirr of the state-threatened red-headed woodpecker. And again, we just stopped here to take a look. I point up to Gary, who's filming, and I said, Gary, look at it. coming right out of the nest cavity. So here we go. This is the whole ball of wax of the point of doing this, is to say we need to protect valuable lands. These types of animals won't exist if we continue to hit it with a death of 1,000 cuts. I guarantee you your grandchildren will not see this if we continue to take the buffer habitat, which is the area by the ridge, and parse it out and then allow that to open the door for more development down the line. You'll see that water quality, habitat quality over time will dissolve, and species like red-headed woodpecker, who are already having major problems with surviving in this century, will be compromised. So here we are at the base of the River Road Ridge, geologically speaking, the base of Fairmont Hill, the second Watchung that held back all of this glacial impacted land from the last glacier. Pretty interesting in and of itself. But I'm here at this spot to show you the backyard of a house right along River Road, where the woman that lives here photographed a state endangered bobcat very recently, okay? One of two recent sightings of bobcat along the ridge. This ridge that is River Road Ridge, a small section of the bigger ecoplex that I talked about previously, is just about a mile away from lot 70, which is the point of contention here. If it gets developed, this minor section of Greenway corridor will be fragmented, and species like bobcat require large highways, wildlife viaducts that allow them to disperse their genetic materials from one population to the next in order to get through the bottleneck that is a sure extinction. So these greenway complexes become very important tentacles for which species, not just bobcat, coyote, which are heard here, seen on game cameras recently, black bear seen on game cameras. This section of the ridge is home to countless varieties of migrating birds, which I've documented in the last month of May 2020. Species names that I'm going to just rattle off that you wouldn't even recognize: worm-eating warbler, black-throated blue warbler, great crested flycatcher, which I hear actually nesting behind me on the site. Okay, we know that this complex supports the buffer habitat to now known red-headed woodpecker, a state endangered species. The other species I've seen here, yellow warbler, common yellowthroat warbler, these are neotropical birds that require these unhindered connected habitats in order to support their future life history. The entire ecology of the ridge cannot be understated, and it's exactly what the forefathers of the master plan in Chatham have presented to be used by planning boards and future decision makers when they balance development against the human need. Impacts are cumulative. When you increase any type of human activity along busy roads that fragment very viable habitats, that's the result. And species like box turtle that could live up to 50, 60 years, end their lives at age 25 when there's many more generations to produce in a very early part of its life history. And as we allow development along these sensitive corridors, the traffic obviously increases, and we're going to see more of the same. So that's another tertiary effect of allowing development in sensitive habitats. Here we are at the right-of-way at the southwest edge of River Road Ridge. This is a greenway, the River Road Ridge is, cement it as an important artery to the globally significant Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, which is just up that right away, another couple of miles along this beautiful greenway. And just like the buffer that the ridge over there is, River Road Ridge is, to the Passaic River on the other side of where I'm standing, to the ecoplex of 3,500 acres, 14 miles of length, right? The River Road Ridge is this pathway for critical species going up into the Great Swamp, species like mink and black bear, and we just talked about bobcat, short-tailed weasels, really intricate wildlife species. There's enough habitat here, buffered enough, and thank God River Road Ridge is part of this complex, 1.5 miles of buffer habitat, and becomes a critical greenway. The state of New Jersey has an actual element in the state master plan called Connecting Habitat Across New Jersey that talks specifically to saving your greenway tentacles to more critical habitats. And again, don't take my word for it. Look at your own 2005 Conservation Master Plan, which clearly states as its mantra, the protection of natural resources in environmentally sensitive areas. Well, geez, this certainly speaks to that. Specifically, the master plan calls out steep slopes, wetlands, streams, floodplains. Chatham Township's most valuable assets, quote unquote. That's what they're saying. They're taken to be, they're supposed to be protected forever. And that's a quote right from the master plan. So I ask, why spend thousands of dollars with Bance Associates who put that plan together for Chatham Township just to ignore it? Anyway, we're right along the right-of-way. It's beautiful. It's alive with field sparrows, prairie warblers, I hear, along the complex. Amazing habitat, all connected to River Road Ridge, just 10 steps to my left. So here we are, basically centralized to River Road Ridge. The heart of the problem that is slated to occur if we allow 10 acres to be removed just, I don't know, 50 feet north of me. Down below is lot 70. I'm on lot 71. No, I'm on lot 69 on Mike Boyd's property. He's allowed us to come back here and do this little video segment. Lot 71, the slated site, is just to our north. But around me, I'm being drenched in birdsong in early June. A wood thrush is calling to my right. I hear a Baltimore Oriole up in the canopy. I hear song sparrows, robins, the buzzing of the blue-winged warbler. Cardinals I've seen in the last 2 minutes go in and out, probably taking a drink from that crucial oasis of a spring that's on lot 70. That has to be considered when you're looking at land use compliance. That's a wetland, a little isolated wetland that drains into a rivulet. Again, I talked about how water comes off this ridge line, either surface water directly or seeping into the ground and coming out of springs and going through rivulets and then feeding the wetlands behind the firehouse, because that's where this little rivulet goes. So all of those groundwater impacts magnify, right, when you develop. Of course, they're going to say, oh, we're going to make the best detention basin and it's going to be cleaner than it was before. Nothing does it better than nature. But the point being is this whole ridge line, part of this geologic formation that is the second watch on, is a corridor for all this life. That's really all I want to emphasize, is this is what the state's master plan talks about with greenway connection. It's what the local ordinance talks about with steep slopes. It's what the Land Use Compliance Board in Chatham Township talks about throughout its document that it gives to developers. And they say specifically, stay away from steep slopes in environmentally sensitive areas. But where do they depict, or where do they want to build? Right on steep slopes in clearly an area of high environmental sensitivity. So, one last thing, while we're sitting here along the River Road Ridge, right kind of smack dab in the area of contention, is to get a real good look of the forest complexity here. It is not insignificant as far as a nice upland hardwood forest. It's got good age class. It's a maturing trees with some younger cereal stage trees with a good understory of mostly non-native shrubs. But the good news is it can still support things like wood thrush and blue-winged warbler. So one other thing, the big two species that come up during a New Jersey GeoWeb search is the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat. And we need to know if they exist on this ridge. We know that the state mapping tells us they're likely to exist, but it's incumbent upon the municipality to do the necessary survey work if we're really serious about endangered species protection. So I just wanted to make sure you understood the vegetative community structure within the environment that's slated for impact. So here we are at the Cardinal Hill Garden Apartments, and I just want to bring to everybody's attention that not only is this what Lot 70 and 71 will look like in not the exact configuration, of course, but this is going to be a direct removal along the River Road ridgeline and going to be replaced with a completely different environment. And what happens besides the direct impact and loss of habitat to the integrity of the ridgeline and the ecology of the ridgeline? Well, one thing that's obvious to anybody is you're going to remove habitat and replace it with impervious surfaces, right? Those impervious surfaces have to now drain water that would normally sheet flow and go into the ground and naturally get into the wetlands across the street, and they're going to be redirected to basins and then brought across the street. So the natural geofluvial components of the system are now disrupted. That's number one. Number two, you have direct impact to the ecological integrity, right? The bears, the bobcats, and the coyotes that normally go through the ridge will go around it or stop and never get to the other side because this is too much of a footprint to continue on. So you're fragmenting the environment. Fragmentation has a huge impact to the lower trophic level species like the ones we talked about before, the wood thrush, the blue-winged warbler that are on Lot 70 and 71. You're going to put you're going to displace that habitat, but you're also going to push them further back into what remains, which again, each impact has an effect on itself and makes it harder and harder for those species to operate, okay? Also, you have the secondary and tertiary impacts of a direct human construct like a townhome complex through the lights that surround the complex, right? They go out into the woodlands. You have noise from general usage of the complex, picnics and cars going around and dump trucks that pick up the big garbage cans, the garbage people. All this sterilizes out a couple hundred meters. There's been studies on what we term forest interior syndrome, where you start to downgrade or depulverize the surrounding environment. So it's not just the 7 or 8 acres of removal, it's then another few acres of sterilization. So that's an impact. Also invasive species. We have people walking dogs. They find ways into the woods. They want to be in nature. So what happens? They create trails within the woodlands, okay? And they end up being dog trails. So what do dog trails do? They help sterilize even more the interior of the forest. So here's one example. I found it quite quickly by just walking around Cardinal Hill, and you can see that there's a trail right into the forest. So in summary, all of the impacts combined aren't localized to just the apartment complex, but they reach out into the forests themselves. I think we're in the most beautiful setting to summarize everything that's been told to you at this point. This is the back of the firehouse, but in wetlands owned by Chatham Township, right along the Passaic River, part of that big ecoplex that I talked about that runs about 14 miles. But most importantly, it's just right across the street from the area of impact that we're discussing here today. Lot 70, lot 71. I could be there in one minute's walk. And the significance of that ridge and all the effects that I mentioned that impact this core area where biodiversity is really high. Just before we got started, I heard red-eyed vireo, catbirds, and I saw blue jays back here. We can easily see that the complex has an open floodplain understory, so there's going to be a whole guild suite of specific species that help to augment what we've already talked about today. We've got to protect our steep slopes. We got to protect our environmentally sensitive areas. We got to protect our water resources, our wetlands, right? We got to protect recharge areas that influence those wetlands. That's where we're standing. We're standing in a floodplain, which is a large wetland complex that's influenced by what's happening on the ridge. We got to protect, the documents say, the master plans and the conservation planned element, talking about habitat corridors. And we've proven that these habitat corridors really exist and really support things like bobcats and black bear. You don't want to fragment them. That's in the language. Fragmentation's in the language. So all the tools are in the shed. It's up to people whose pay scale is larger than mine to make the right decisions when balancing our growth in our fair share housing with the perpetuation of natural resources, which we claim we value at the highest level. I thank you for listening, and I hope that that this has been useful for a host of people that are involved in the scenario before you. Thank you. So you're driving down the road and you got your two kids in the back seat, and one of them says, "Hey, slow down, look at that. Why are they tearing that woods down, Mom, Dad?" Really, what's your answer? The only answer really is we weren't innovative enough. I am sorry. We didn't find a way to balance our needs with the needs of all life on Earth.